Because the original transcript provided is in English, this narrative adaptation has been fully expanded and written in English according to your language requirement, while maintaining a smooth, cohesive, and expressive literary style. The golden afternoon light filtered softly through the coastal haze, casting a warm, deceptive quiet over the pier. Todd Ballinger held the steering wheel with both hands, his fingers tightening against the smooth leather as he glanced toward the passenger seat. Beside him sat Lisa, her eyes fixed on the open expanse of the ocean. To anyone passing by, they looked like a couple enjoying a serene weekend getaway, far removed from the sharp eyes and whispered rumors of their small town. But beneath the calm surface, tension rattled through every word they spoke. Lisa leaned her head back against the headrest, letting out a long, trembling breath. She whispered that she still could not believe they had actually pulled it off, having an entire weekend entirely to themselves without anyone asking questions or demanding explanations. Todd offered a quiet, reassuring smile, asking how she had managed to clear the time with her mother. Lisa let out a soft laugh, revealing her mother had flown up to Sacramento that very morning to attend to important personal affairs. Lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, she confessed a secret her mother was on the verge of receiving an appointment to the bench. Todd glanced at her in genuine surprise, questioning if her mother was truly becoming a judge. He remarked with light-hearted awe that a judge in the family was quite something to behold. Yet as he looked closely at Lisa, the celebratory warmth faded. Her expression remained shadowed with anxiety, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her dress. Todd gently asked what was wrong, sensing the heavy hesitation hanging between them. Lisa looked down at her hands, admitting that she felt deeply uncomfortable being there with him in such a manner. Todd tried to brush it off with a gentle chuckle, encouraging her to leave behind the overly cautious mindset of their small town. But Lisa shook her head softly, explaining that she was just a small-town girl at heart and could not easily quiet her conscience. She confessed that the constant lying weighed heavily on her. Just that morning, she had been forced to call the country club to pretend she was ill, forcing them to find another waitress to cover her shift at the event. Todd reached over, placing a comforting hand over hers. He reassured her that serving drinks at a club was beneath her anyway, telling her she was far too special for that kind of work. Yet Lisa could not find relief so easily. She brought up Harold, wondering what would happen if her husband decided to call her from Tucson. She asked how she could possibly explain being away from their apartment for an entire weekend if he checked up on her. Todd suggested calmly that she could simply say the phone lines were out of order, adding that she herself had mentioned Harold rarely ever called while traveling on business. Lisa gazed out the window, murmuring that perhaps Harold was dealing with his own internal struggles. But she quickly dismissed the thought, remembering how Harold had always insisted that when he married her, it was a commitment meant for life. Todd watched her carefully, asking if she was starting to feel sorry for him. Lisa hesitated before admitting that perhaps a small part of her did. Todd leaned closer, his voice soft yet earnest, reminding her that if he did not love her so deeply, he never would have allowed any of this to begin. He insisted that what they shared was the best thing that had ever happened to either of them. Lisa looked at him, her eyes softening as she agreed. But before the comfort of his words could fully settle, a sudden, sharp rustle echoed from the dark tree nearby. Lisa froze, her breath catching in her throat as she asked what the noise was. Todd scanned the shadows, suggesting it might just be the wind, though he noted the sound had clearly come from the dense brush a few paces away. Seeing the fear in her eyes, he offered to go check it out. He stepped out into the cool air, his boots crunching softly on the dirt path. But before he could take more than a few steps, a figure stepped abruptly out of the dark shadows. It was Harold. His face was twisted with fury, his eyes locked onto Lisa with sharp betrayment. Lisa gasped, stepping back in terror as she pleaded with him, trying to explain that things were not what they appeared to be. Harold cut her off with a cold, harsh sneer, telling her to save her lies and calling her a treacherous tramp. Todd immediately stepped between them, raising his hands in a calming gesture, urging Harold to take a breath and cool down before doing anything reckless. But Harold was past the point of listening. He shoved Todd back, snarling that he would deal with him right after he finished dealing with her. Harold reached into his heavy coat, pulling out a dark, metallic handgun. Lisa screamed, begging him not to shoot. A frantic scuffle broke out in the dim light. Hands grabbed for the weapon, voices shouted in panic, and in the chaos, a deafening gunshot cracked through the night air. Silence fell instantly over the clearing, heavy and absolute. Harold swayed for a second, his shock mirroring the silence, before collapsing heavily onto the ground. Todd stood frozen, the gun trembling in his hand, his breathing coming in ragged, terrified gasps. He stared down at the motionless body, stammering that he had not meant to shoot, that it had all happened too fast. Lisa rushed forward, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she knelt by her husband. Todd urged her to go call an ambulance immediately, but as he reached down to check Harold's pulse, he slowly lowered his head. He told her softly that it was too late. Harold was dead. Lisa sank back onto her knees, burying her face in her hands as tears spooled down her cheeks. The reality of the situation crashed over her like a freezing wave. Todd quickly pulled a flask from his pocket, handing it to her and telling her to drink a little to steady her nerves. Lisa took a swallow, coughing slightly before murmuring that she did not feel sorry for what had happened, though she immediately wondered if saying such a thing made her a terrible person. Todd took the gun from the ground, his mind racing through the immediate consequences. He stated that he needed to call the police right away. But Lisa caught his arm, pleading with him to wait and talk things through first. Todd pointed out that as a future lawyer, he knew the law, but Lisa reminded him of his mother. She asked him to consider what a massive, ruined scandal like this would do to his mother's prospective judicial appointment. Todd paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He argued that it had been an accident, a clear case of self-defense, and that his mother would surely understand. Lisa agreed that his mother would understand in her heart, but the public fallout alone would instantly destroy her chances of being appointed to the bench by the governor. Todd stared into the dark woods, torn between his duty and his devotion to his family. Lisa looked into his eyes, begging him to trust her, insisting that they could handle this together without destroying everything his mother had worked for. Before they could decide their next move, the low rumble of an approaching engine cut through the night. Headlights swept across the trees. Someone was coming down the driveway. Todd quickly pushed the gun into his pocket and stepped into the dim illumination of the lanterns near the boathouse. An older man named Ernest stepped out of a nearby maintenance shed, holding a lantern aloft. He greeted Todd, calling him Mr. Ballinger, and asked if everything was all right. Todd forced a smooth, easy laugh, explaining that a friend had simply had a bit too much to drink and needed to sleep it off. Ernest offered to help haul the guest inside, but Todd politely declined, saying they would just walk him around until his head cleared. Ernest nodded in understanding, wishing Todd a pleasant evening before heading back toward his quarters. Once the old man was out of sight, Todd and Lisa moved quickly. They pulled a heavy, rusted storage trunk out from the boathouse. Lisa pointed toward a heavy length of anchor chain resting in the corner, suggesting they use it as weight to keep the trunk anchored securely at the bottom of the bay. Todd agreed it was a necessary precaution. As they hauled the heavy chest toward the edge of the pier, Lisa suddenly gasped, realizing they had almost left the gun behind. Todd retrieved the weapon, placing it inside the trunk before fastening the heavy latch and pushing the chest into the dark, silent waters below. Meanwhile, across town in a modest office filled with organized files and the faint scent of stale coffee, Private Investigator Barnaby Jones sat behind his desk, reviewing a series of documents. Across from him sat Evelyn Burke, a woman whose tired eyes carried the weight of long-standing grief and disappointment. Barnaby leaned forward, placing a photograph on the desk. He explained that when he had initially tracked her husband down using his social security number, he discovered the man had taken a position with a real estate firm under an assumed name Murphy, Harold Murphy. Evelyn sighed, guessing that he had changed his name simply to make it harder for her to find him. Barnaby shook his head gently, revealing that there was more to the story. The young waitress her husband had vanished with years ago was still very much in the picture. In fact, Harold had officially married her. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief, whispering that such a thing was impossible because she and Harold had never been legally divorced. Barnaby's assistant, Betty, entered the room with a fresh cup of tea, noting that she had called Harold's office earlier that morning to check if he would be available. The secretary there had mentioned she was unsure of his schedule, suggesting Betty call his apartment directly to speak with his wife. Evelyn felt a cold chill run through her chest. She spoke bitterly of the tragedy of giving years of her life to a man, bearing his child, only to be tossed aside as if those years meant nothing. She looked Barnaby in the eye and declared that she wanted him in jail, wanting to see him brought to justice for the destruction he had caused. Barnaby listened with deep empathy, gently asking her to think about her young daughter, Betsy. He asked whether having her father behind bars would truly benefit the young girl in the long run. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting out a heavy sigh as she realized the wisdom in his words. She admitted that she did not truly want revenge. What she really needed was a formal divorce and sufficient child support to ensure Betsy had the same opportunities and advantages as other children. Barnaby smiled warmly, agreeing that pursuing a proper settlement was indeed the best path forward. Back at the coastal property, the morning sun brought no relief to Todd Ballinger. He was near the storage shed when an old handyman named Andy walked up, looking for a screwdriver. Todd handed him the tool, trying to keep his demeanor light. But Andy hesitated, looking around the floor of the boathouse with a puzzled expression. Andy asked about an old trunk that had been sitting in the corner for months, mentioning it had contained an ancient anchor chain that was rusting away. Andy explained he had hoped to sell the scrap metal to earn a few extra dollars, but wondered if Todd had found a better use for it. Todd stiffened slightly, claiming he had no idea what trunk he was referring to. Andy stroked his chin, noting that he could have sworn he saw the trunk right there before heading home for dinner the previous evening, yet when he returned later during his nightly walk, it had completely vanished. Andy then casually mentioned seeing Todd driving away from the property late the night before, accompanied by a young woman. Todd realized he was being backed into a corner. He quickly changed his story, admitting that it had indeed been him. He explained that he had simply been clearing out a lot of old junk from around the property and had used the trunk to haul it all away, including the rusted chain. Andy offered a knowing look, saying there was no need to apologize for the scrap iron, but noted that as long as they were discussing money, there were numerous repairs around the docks that needed attending to. Andy offered to handle the work for a reasonable fee, warning Todd with a dry smile not to wait too long, as inflation kept pushing the price of everything higher and higher. Later that afternoon, Barnaby Jones arrived at the Graybriar Apartments on Franklin Boulevard. As he walked toward the main leasing office, he was greeted by Frank Delbert, an energetic representative for the Sunshine Retirement Village development. Delbert immediately began pitching the safety and comfort of his community, talking at length about how recent news was full of robberies and break-ins, making it vital for folks to secure a safe place to live. Barnaby smiled politely, introducing himself and explaining that he had actually come to see Harold Murphy on a personal matter. Delbert's enthusiasm instantly vanished. He informed Barnaby that Murphy no longer worked for the company. When Barnaby asked if he had left for a better position, Delbert scoffed, stating that a man who acted the way Murphy did not need a new job, he needed a psychiatrist. Delbert vented his frustration, explaining that Murphy had just thrown away a $1,600 commission after working on it for weeks. Just the previous day, Murphy was supposed to fly to Tucson to close a major deal with a key client, but instead, he had abruptly walked in and quit without warning. Barnaby noted the detail carefully and asked for Murphy's residential address, which Delbert provided before returning to his sales brochures. Barnaby walked up the stairs to the second floor of the Graybriar complex. As he approached the apartment door, he spotted Lisa carrying several heavy packages. He stepped forward, offering to lend a hand. Lisa looked up in surprise, asking how he knew her name and if they had met before. Barnaby introduced himself as a private investigator, explaining he was looking for Mr. Murphy. Lisa quickly recovered her composure, stating that her husband was currently out of town on business in Tucson. Barnaby noted the contradiction, remarking softly that representatives at the real estate office had mentioned he was not in Tucson and had recently resigned. Lisa blinked, quickly correcting herself by claiming she meant Phoenix, laughingly adding that Harold traveled so frequently that she constantly mixed up the cities. She insisted he was pursuing a promising new job opportunity there. Barnaby nodded thoughtfully, stepping inside the apartment as she set the packages down. He explained that he was representing a client named Mrs. Harris, holding up a photograph of Harold Burke. Lisa looked at the picture and froze, stammering that it was impossible, asserting firmly that the man in the photo was her husband, Harold. Barnaby observed her reaction closely, pointing out that from all available evidence, it appeared her husband was married to two women at the same time. Lisa insisted there had to be a mistake, declaring that she and Harold had been legally married in Reno on their way down from Seattle. Barnaby gently informed her that a young child was involved, explaining that his client simply wished to arrange proper child support for her daughter. Lisa sat down heavily, her face pale. She declined Barnaby's offer of assistance, claiming she had no idea where Harold was staying in Phoenix. Barnaby stood up, asking her to have Harold contact him as soon as he reached out, expressing his desire to resolve the matter quietly without involving law enforcement. That evening, Todd returned to his family's residence. The quiet elegance of the house offered him no comfort. As he walked into the living room, his mother, Rose Ballinger, greeted him warmly. She teased him about missing her flight arrival, though her eyes shone with pride. Todd smiled, asking if he should start addressing her as Your Honor. Rose laughed, warning him that if he ever used such a formal title at home, she would disown him. She shared the wonderful news that the governor was scheduled to officially announce her judicial appointment the following Thursday. Todd embraced her, expressing how proud his father would have been. He gathered her luggage to carry upstairs, asking if anything unusual had occurred while she was away. Rose mentioned casually that the bank had called regarding a massive withdrawal of $25,000 from their joint account earlier that week. She assured him she had no intention of prying unless he wished to share the details himself, trusting his judgment entirely.